Mariah and I created this group, and our goal is to have these monthly conversations, very open, fluid monthly conversations about different topics. We recognize that systemic racism is a very sensitive topic. It's hard to discuss, and it might be hard to hear some of the information that we're going to talk about today. Please keep in mind that our goal is to have a very open discussion without blame, defense, or anger, so that we can deepen our understanding about different concepts that maybe we've never heard of or that are the realm out of the realm of your experience. We realize people are coming from different perspectives. We have different intersectionalities going on, and so we are coming from different experiences. Some of them, us may have more experience with these topics than other people do, but we want to create this safe space to have these very open dialogues. So, Mariah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mariah Hayden. I've known Sangeeta for a long time now. This is our second project we've worked together around these conversations and these conferences. We wanted to take, for those of you who are new to the conversation, a different approach this time and not only talk about DEI in the workplace setting, which is traditionally where it's been talked about, but with everything that's been happening in the last year, we want to be able to bring it into the context of being a parent of in the family, of in the community, in your churches, because these issues are everywhere and they're impacting us everywhere. So that's our hope, is it's more of a holistic conversation. A couple housekeeping tips today. So the session is being recorded. We will share the recording after the call if there's anybody who couldn't make it that you want to share it with. We'll be together for about an hour and a half today. There'll be about 3 breakout sessions. Please keep yourself muted unless you're talking during that time, and then you can unmute yourself. And go ahead and share questions in the chat. And when we do the breakout sessions, we will put the questions you guys should be talking about in the chat before you go to the breakout rooms. I think I've covered anything. Any quick housekeeping questions before we get started? No? Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Captain Timika Lindsay, who is the Chief Diversity Officer for the United States Naval Academy, and she has been in this position since 2017. In this capacity, Captain Lindsay serves as a senior advisor to the superintendent on all matters regarding inclusion, diversity, on anything to do with equal opportunity or equal employment opportunity. She has also served as the Assistant Chief of Staff for Communications and Information Systems. And she is a native of New Jersey. She graduated herself from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1992 and holds 2 Master of Science degrees. She has won numerous awards, including the Legion of Merit, Meritorious Service Medals, several of them Joint Service Commission, Commendation Medal, and Naval and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, and many, many others. She is also the proud mother of Eric Jr., who will be attending the Academy in 2021, and Elise, who is her daughter, who's also attending the Academy, making them the first Black mother-daughter team to attend the U.S. Naval Academy. So a very warm welcome to Captain Timika Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, and thank you for inviting me. I have enjoyed working with you and Mariah on this journey. I really appreciate you reaching out to me all the way here in Annapolis, Maryland. And thank you to all of you who've taken the time to join this workshop. I have found that attending these workshops to be beneficial, no matter how many classes you've taken or certifications that you have. Every person who walks this earth is unique in their experiences and their views and opinions. And having this opportunity to be able to understand more, and for example, to be able to walk in each other's shoes, to be able to experience, know, and do more can help us in our decision-making in how we move forward. As Dr. Gupta said, I am a captain in the United States Navy. I'm actually the senior ranking Black female in the Navy today. No, I'm not in my uniform. I would typically have on my khakis right now, but I'm also in the process of beginning my transition into retirement. I am blessed to have been wearing this uniform since graduating from high school It is going to be an incredible transition for me, but I have decided, even though I've spent 25 years as a communications officer, I really feel a passion towards the diversity, equity, and inclusion arena, because I feel like there's some work to do. What I've learned over the years that I've been here is that diversity is not more than just a state of being. It's not more than just a noun. It is actually a part of action, and the action does take inclusion and the adverb, if you will, the how you will feel is the sense of belongingness. But what we call diversity and inclusion is more of a force multiplier in being able to gather people's opinions and perspectives in a respectful manner, to understand their backgrounds. Maybe they had an experience that we hadn't experienced, that we had not experienced before, and can help us in our decision making. So to be able to express that in a respectful manner, and to be an active listener, and to be able to have the courage to speak, has become very important in what we consider for our presence and our defensive posture in the military. Specifically in the Navy, we talk about a culture of excellence, and we talk about three critical areas. One is trust. We have to trust each other when we are going to be going to war and fight and defend our country and protect its allies. If we don't have that trust in one another, if we can't look at the other person and know and be sure that we have each other's back, that creates corrosion in the team. That creates corrosion in what we need to accomplish. The toughness part, let me go back, let me close out one more other thing with the trust. The trust has to go up and down. The trust, you have to believe in your leader and trust them to be able to carry out and the orders, but be able to carry it out effectively, to be a good leader, effectively making sure that the mission is accomplished without any hurt or harm to any people. The toughness comes as a part of not just the physical toughness. We're known for our physical toughness, right? We go to wars, we fight and defend. We take our physical fitness test twice a year. It's in our job description. We have to be fit. But we're talking about the mental toughness now. We're talking about the part that says, I'm okay, I look okay on the outside, but really on the inside, I'm hurting. And there could be various reasons as to why they're hurting. And today we're going to try and unpack one of them. And then the connectedness, having connections. I was fortunate enough to know a mutual friend of Dr. Gupta and myself, and we made this connection last fall. But continuing to have connections and to be able to enrich yourself with additional information and knowledge and how you can move yourself forward gives you a better circle, a wider circle, a larger circle, and how you communicate and how you think and how you process things, instead of staying in the same circle that you're in. My boss, one of my former bosses, used to tell me, if you're not learning something new every day, you're dying. So continue to challenge yourself and to learn something new, something that's out of your norm. And this has definitely been something that's been out of people's norm. And it's really the deeper conversation about diversity and what it means. And in the past, there have been some walls that we have hit. And it basically, in an attempt to diffuse or to get off of the conversation of diversity and what it's necessary for, and to understand different people's views, there's been different reactions to that. So we're going to unpack that a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and start my slideshow. Okay, can everyone see this okay? Okay, great. So, do you hear what I hear? You may have heard these comments before. I come from humble beginnings and I had to work hard to get where I am today. Or, I didn't do that to your people, meaning Blacks, so why should I have to pay for what happened? Or, why can't we just get over this and move on? The tones of defensiveness, anger, and denial resound throughout those responses, providing little hope there will ever be any reconciliation. Biases and lack of understanding continue to grow in this gap, where our world defines respect based on the color of one's skin. But what if we can have a deeper conversation? What if there was an opportunity to continue to grow or expand that conversation? What if we could then ask the question after somebody makes a comment like that? Well, if you could change it, what would you do? What could you do? Now that we're here, what actions do we need to unpack the systemic racism that exists in our society today? And we need to look at the areas of education, empathy, engagement, or empowerment. So I'm going to ask you, as we're going to be going into a few breakout sessions during this lecture, and I'm going to ask you to look at this next slide a little deeper, just really look at it, observe it for a few minutes, and we'll have a discussion. And my question to you is, do you see what I see? David Horsey made this slide, made this cartoon. It's called The American Dream Game, where he shares his opinion on how white Americans reach their American dream with significantly fewer adversities than Black Americans because of predisposed cultural circumstances. Take a look really hard at this slide. Notice the differences that you see in there. And we're going to go into breakout rooms and we're going to ask you a few questions here. In this breakout room, I'm going to ask you to take about 15 minutes, make sure that your team assigns a recorder, and say, when you first saw the slide, what was your reaction to this path, the American Dream Game? What struck you the most? What was your key takeaway from this slide? And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about a little bit as far as what the differences are. If you can't see the slide, we'll make sure the questions are posted. But if you are close to another computer or your smartphone, just Google the American Dream Game, and the author is David Horsey, Horsey. Over to you, Dr. Gupta.
So Mariah is just going to be putting you all into small breakout rooms to have your discussions. And as Captain Lindsay said, we'll be coming back to our larger group and then we're just going to debrief. So our goal today is just to have a really open conversation about this topic. So there's the slide again. And Timika, do you want to talk a little bit about what you see? Anything? Do you want to point out anything, or do you want to wait until they come back?
I'll start off with a couple, and then I'll listen to what the rest of the group has to say. I don't want to give all the ideas, but the first thing you see is a curvy versus the straight path. And obviously, we know that the shortest distance between 2 points is the straight line. We learned that in grade school, high school. So obviously the curves and the additional length that is caused, that the path that the Black person is on is going to take much longer, and trying to understand, why aren't they there yet? Why haven't they reached that American dream? You can see who's on the path too, and then the question: are you just slow or what? That, to me, that just calls out, why doesn't the white person see the path that the Black person has gone throughout history? And these are known history positions or events that have happened to Black America, and what is the result of it. So I'll turn it back over to everyone to see what else you see in this picture.
Mariah, you're on mute.
Real quick before we go, I did type the questions in the room. I'm doing it too, Dr. Lindsay, Captain Lindsay, and Dr.
Can we just go Timika? We can just go Timika or Timmy.
Yeah,
that's fine.
yeah.
I'm totally okay with that. Let's get comfortable here. Okay.
Unfortunately, it's going to send you guys both to the rooms. It's not letting me remove you from the rooms.
Okay.
So just to give you a heads up for that. And this is a 10-minute breakout or a 15-minute breakout?
15.
15. Okay. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Wait, Sangeeta, you can decline the invitation if you
Right.
want. Okay.
Did you
and
pause the recording?
hold on.
I'm in. So the first group is Brooke, Denise, Kevin, and Patty. Did you all assign a speaker for your group? Can I have one of you unmute?
Kevin, did you have a speaker
I
in your
don't think
group?
we assigned an official recorder, but we have kind of all, conversed amongst ourselves about the issues. Let me go look.
Well, I'm fine with all four of you unmuting yourself, and then we can just go through the questions and you can tell us what your perspectives were. Would you want to do that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
One thing I talked about is just kind of, it obviously is going back a lot farther than our own generation, and kind of, it makes it very complex. And I think it was the first slide where it talks about like, well, I didn't, directly contribute to this. Why should I, be like responsible for it? It's something that I've always thought, like, struck me about that is that, like, conversely, like, other people who are affected by it weren't involved with it. Why should they be paying the price for some of these things that they weren't even alive for? So that was something that has always struck me personally.
I've felt so I definitely that as well, and I think you hear the word microaggression all the time, but these are like macroaggressions. Like these are like giant systemic issues, and to me, it really also made me appreciate the resilience of the Black community. The fact that like after walking that long road, they like still this summer happened. After every single one of those things, like still the Black community has to be put in a position where they have to ask what they did for what they deserve, and they have to feel like they demand it, and they have to be put in that position. So it also just made me like kind of recognize and respect the amount of work that's gone into all of that even more. And I think it brings a level of empathy to the table, just for like the generational struggle that there's been there. So like resilience was just a word that popped in my head. It's just like, oh my God, this thing's been going on forever and it's still winding,
Right.
I have a
Do you have
follow-up question to that, if we could share. When you're saying, I don't want to misquote you, basically saying, why do I have to pay for those things that, for things I didn't do, but I don't, what is it that you're paying? How are you paying for it? By the fact that those things happen, how are you paying for it?
That wasn't for me specifically. That's like saying people in the white community say like, why should I be held accountable for something I didn't do? And that they don't really consider the other perspective that, well, we are being held accountable for something we weren't alive for. Like, why should we be held accountable for it? So that was kind of, if that makes sense.
Christian, that was one of the, because you logged in a little bit late, that was one of the opening things that Timika shared. So it became one of the questions his group talked about. I don't know if
Yeah, well, we didn't have the questions, so I apologize.
Right.
But
So
I was
it's
just trying
like
to get understanding.
It's like a deflection. I wouldn't say tactic, but it's something that people use to kind of avoid the difficult conversations, I think is the point of it.
Mm-hmm.
Timika had shared it in the context of this is how a lot of Caucasians respond to this and say, why is this my issue? And the whole, it goes along with the topic today of how to talk about this without being defensive and getting angry. But that's like the knee-jerk response that most people have. So that was why that was part of that discussion. Right. Not most, but a lot.
Yeah. And when these outbursts or when these responses happen, it kind of just stifles the conversation. And both parties leave feeling more frustrated about the other person's opinion in the matter. Like, oh, this person's trying to force an agenda, and then this person doesn't want to hear or doesn't want to include me in the conversation, and they'll never understand me or where I'm coming from. And that's just been the continued dialogue of non-communication, with these very diverting questions. And again, the question is, well, who pays for it? I don't think that it's necessarily a who pays, but you see the road, and we'll go into the other groups. well, I'll shut up so we can talk to the other groups. Let's look at the other groups and see what they say about it.
Brooke, did you want to share something?
I just wanted to say that, you know, the first thought that came to my mind when I saw that cartoon was disappointment. You know, we are not making it easy on anybody to get ahead in life whatsoever, except for, you know, the white person obviously had the very easy road to get from point A to point B in their life. And, you know, the time is now to really step in for, you know, myself and our community to really help those voices be heard. And we were talking about Georgia specifically and the voter suppression that's taking place, and not only that state, but other states based on the last election, and really advocating for folks to be able to have their rights not taken away from them. It shouldn't be the African Americans standing up for themselves constantly. We need to be there to support them as well.
Right. Patty, you were part of that group. Did you want to say anything?
Oh, I guess when we talk about the question of, you know, I didn't do it, why should I have to pay for it? The thing that occurred to me was in Illinois, our, you know, education spending is based on real estate tax. Such in the amount that is spent per student, that in fact we perpetuate the system through things like that. And so that was the thing that occurred to me.
Yeah, that's very true. And especially it was really amplified with the pandemic, where you saw like our school district, they immediately sent out an email saying, we've got 10,000 laptops. Let us know if you need one. And so that was, and hotspots and things like that. And, you know, other school districts are struggling just to get, you know, the basic things to their students, whereas our school district was immediately able to do that. That's an educational privilege. That's a socioeconomic privilege that we have to acknowledge and then say, okay, well, wait a minute, if this is happening in our school district, why is it not happening in other school districts, and what can we do to address this? So that's what we can be doing today to address the systemic racism that has been present for hundreds of years. Does anyone else want to say anything? I think we've got a small enough group today that we can just really have an open dialogue. So, you know, unmute yourself if you want to contribute to the conversation. And if not, then we'll go ahead and let Timika finish up her comments.
Quick question, Timika and Sangeeta, do we want to maybe think about not going down to breakout rooms and just be a breakout room within ourselves because it's a small enough group?
It's really, I mean, I'm flexible however you all want to do it. Is it better? So you let us know. Do you prefer to go out into the smaller groups for discussion, or do you want to have a group discussion with a larger group?
So show your hand if you want to stay, if you want to go to small groups. Okay. Show your hand if you'd rather be this size group for the discussion points. Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, so then we will not go ahead and break out into the different breakout rooms. All right, so Timika, did you want to finish? And I figured out why I keep calling you doctor. It's because you and I have talked a lot about you doing a PhD, and so I'm just wishing that on you right now.
Thank you. So I was actually the recorder on my team, and before I go into my comments, I want to add on, I had Leanne and Valis in my group. And Leanne mentioned a privilege walk exercise that she had been through. And maybe many of you have seen that before, the privilege walk, when a series of questions is asked of you and the opportunities that are afforded to groups of people. And when the questions were finished, there was definitely a clear line across the demographic where the minority, the people of color, were in the back. They did not get a chance to take as many steps. To Leanne, it showed how desperate we need to have this conversation now for our understanding, for everyone's understanding of the walk, and the need to have this conversation now to understand the walk that the Black community has gone through. She also talked about a tone of invisibility. She recently had an experience with her hairdresser, and another the conversation of white privilege and how the tone of white privilege has turned off so many people. And I'll be honest with you, I know that that is a very sensitive term, and I don't bring that up too often in my speeches or in my conversations, but I too know that I came from an area of privilege. I know that I am better off than some people, and I'm worse off to a lot more. However, when you look at the numbers per capita, the privilege is definitely not, we're not at equity when it comes to African Americans to having that same opportunity. On the path, it shows the Black man looking at the white man, like his response to him, like, why aren't you here already? It was absolute disbelief. Like, I can't believe you're asking me this question now. And he slouched, he is fatigued. And that fatigue comes from the cumulative effect of all of the things that have happened over time for him to get to where he is. So in Vallis's comments that, it was just intriguing that the paths are very distinctly different on which each of them had to go through. And it does say a lot about the African-American experience. They both agreed that the history is not surprising. The history that those things that happened were real. They were not made up. And it's not surprising, but it's disappointing to see that some of these things just happened just decades ago. And in some communities, it's still going on today. So we're not talking about Jim Crow laws of the early 1900s. In fact, they're calling it, I've heard it called James Crow Jr. or Jim Crow Part 2. That's going on today when we're looking at policies and procedures that are affecting the minority community. And the question, brings to bear that, is this a distant memory or not? Is this still going on? And as we've seen, especially as studies have been presenting itself over the last few years, there is a lot of work to be done because there are many disparities and seeking of social justice, which we'll be talking about more today. But some of the things that I, also saw in the pictures, I was looking at the, and I was a game player growing up, right? So it says the American Dream game, and it's nice and cursive, and it's a dream. That font shows a good place, a happy place. And then you look at the font on how it's written, and it says for the content of the blocks, for the white man's path, you get free. You get
Timika,
free.
Excuse me, Timika, are we supposed to be looking at your PowerPoint again?
Oh, I can go back to it. I can go back to it for sure. Let me go back. Let's do that.
Okay, I didn't know. It sounded like you were talking about a visual.
Yes, thank you very much, Mariah, for saying it. So we see the American Dream game, the nice cursive piece off at the top, and just trying to get to that place that it looks just visibly appealing, where we see the big block letters that are within the tiles for the paths. And the white man's path shows that there are free things that get to happen to them. And the free does come at a cost from another group. So the free land coming from the Native Americans, the free labor coming from slavery. Whereas if you look at the Black man's path, you see a lot of lose in there. Lose 6 turns, lose 8 turns. And even the color of the path, it's just a very dismal color path that the Black man is on, where the road for the white man is much brighter and cheery. We saw the slouching of the Black man versus the upright, as if he had a very peaceful stroll along the road. It's a very distinct difference between what has happened and what continues to happen that may slow a Black community to receiving equity. And we talk about these areas today. We're seeing it right now with the vaccine. the disparity in getting the vaccine to the communities of color, and the distrust that the communities of color actually have with medicine. And why is that? Because we had things like the Tuskegee Project that actually put a disease into Black men, and even though they had a cure, continued to not treat these people until after 1972. So there is a trust factor, there's a huge trust factor in the community, but the question is, should we still go this way? What is this getting us in our community, in our United States? So let me move on to the next slide. Let's move on to our.
Timika,
Okay,
before you move on, I wanted to
Sure.
we brought up the concept of white privilege and why that's really hard for people to talk about. And I just want to clarify that, there's a difference between privilege is something that you're born with. It's not something that you ask for, and it's not something, and no one denies that people work hard. So I have educational privilege. Because of the family that I was born into, I have socioeconomic privilege. I didn't have to earn that. That was something that was given to me. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't work hard for my education, but the ability to go to a graduate program, that was something, that's a privilege. That's not a privilege that I earned. It was something that was given to me by my family. And so we have to take the blame out of people having privilege, because a lot of this is things that we're born into. But at the same time, we have to recognize the advantage of privilege. So as I was talking about with the pandemic and the availability of digital equipment, I mean, my children didn't have to worry about that. They had all the digital equipment that they needed. They had space in our home to go to different locations where they could learn quiet in a quiet space. And not everyone has that. That is a privilege that we have to acknowledge. So I think if we can have these open discussions about, what exactly is privilege, and it doesn't mean that you didn't work hard for something, but you have to then acknowledge that you have it. I think these type of conversations can help take some of the stigma and the anger that people feel when they hear something like white privilege.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's not meant to be a personal attack. It's to promote awareness, really, of to where you are and understanding where others are. In no way has anyone ever asked someone to bring out a check to say, you owe me this much, you owe me this in a personal manner. They're just asking for that same opportunity to be able to get themselves or their families at some equal opportunity, to be able to have a good education, to be able to live in decent housing, to be able to receive the better medicine, to be able to have access to healthier foods. That's what the communities are asking for. And the question is, for everyone, is it that hard to give?
So real quick before we move on to the next topic, for anybody else on the call, or I keep saying the call, does anybody else have a reaction or a comment about the use of the concept of white privilege, or a reaction to it or defense to it? And I say this being one of the three leaders of the conversation who's Caucasian, right? All of us are free to share our opinion. Is there anybody else who wants to share a reaction to this before we move on? Completely safe space. All answers are totally acceptable. I just want to give folks the opportunity.
Hi, excuse me. I just wanted to say, like, in the group that I was in, I noted that the question, "Are you just slow or what?" can be very triggering for a Black person, because from a very young age, we're already taught that we have to be of a certain way. There's like a real push for us to always gain for the best, because we are aware of this type of thinking. And that question of "are you slow or just what?" can make it seem like you're trying to say Black people are stupid. It can give that type of feeling for, our people. So that was just something that came to mind, where we're always having that, or that thought will always be in the back of our mind, because we have come across so many of these issues in America.
I don't know who just shared that. I looked at all the videos. I couldn't see who was talking.
I'm sorry, this is Kenesha.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much for sharing that. Does anybody else have a response or something to share?
Yeah, this is Sharon. I think so. With the question of white privilege, I'm always mindful about using labels because I don't like labels being placed on me. So I'm mindful about placing labels on other people. So whatever the label is, you're going to trigger somebody somewhere. So that's just always going to be the case. And so perhaps in the midst of using the label, the definition is provided, as was shared earlier, that privilege is something you're born into. That being said, then I think about another, could it be privilege? I don't know, because my background is not American. I mean, I was born in New York, but all of my background is Jamaican. So I lived in Jamaica, my whole family's Jamaica. And so even growing up and going through school, of course I could sympathize and empathize, but I couldn't connect myself to the Black American experience because that's not what I had growing up. And I know other Jamaicans of African descent who have felt the same way. And in schools, we just didn't know how to say it. And we felt bad saying it. And we didn't know how to say it because we were kids. But as adults, we know how to say it now. Like, oh, I didn't connect to this because now you start talking about the Jamaican history and how slavery played its part there, then I can feel a connection to that. So I think in these conversations, there's so much to hold in our heads. You can't remember everything, but as much as possible to remember that all Blacks don't feel that way. I don't feel a way if someone says to me, are you slow or what? Because I'm like, no, I'm not slow. You got a problem? And I keep moving. But if it connects to your background and what you experienced, then of course that question would be triggering. And I see that. And I just think it's important to remember that everyone's experience, every Black is not American, if you know what I mean when I say that.
I think that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it reminds us not to assume, but for any of us, for anybody in any group, anybody with Indian background, anybody Caucasian background, anybody, we all like to make assumptions because of how somebody looks and put them in a bucket because we feel like we know, and that's so dangerous. Thank you for sharing that, Sharon.
Yeah, those labels, yeah, just on the other side, it definitely hurts. So if Sharon were to walk into a post office or walk, somewhere, they don't know her as a doctor, a EDD doctor. Did I get that correct, Sharon? You have an EDD or PhD? PhD. Excuse me. So as a PhD, would not know that. That's not, her label. And I had a conversation with my daughter this morning, and she said, I feel protected that I get to walk around in my uniform, in my military uniform, but when I take it off, then what? That I am a student that's attending the Naval Academy, and it was impacting her, on how she's viewed, and I couldn't negate it because I felt the same way. So these types of labels on being slow or what, and let's talk about where those ideas come from, right? So we talk about the ideas coming from, our home, our culture. Maybe our schools are not fully integrated. Maybe it is very homogenous. So is that how people think? And let's not negate the media. I would probably say the media has started coming around, just starting to come around. But I know that I used to cringe watching local news because the first 10 minutes of the news would be like, a Black man did this, or three Black men were caught doing this, or a Black woman did this. And it painted the Black community as a very bad person. It just as a bad community, bad overall. And of course, let's not forget about I guess it's about a little over 50 years old. Remember the blue eye, brown eye experiment that was done by Jane Elliott, I think that was her name. When she started, treating them differently based off of the color of their eyes. How people felt that, like, what do you mean I can't go out to play? What do you mean that I can't have this extra fun? I don't understand. And they were, well, it's because your eyes are brown, you cannot do this. And it just made people think, well, why are they privileged just because of the color of their eyes? Like, I don't understand that. So these are the things that we continue to look at and that we need to unpack. I know that I hear, and many of you in your profession, when you're trying to gain more minorities or more representation, more diversity representation in your organizations, and you say, well, where are they? They're just not there. That's not true. They're there. but there's not many of that group that you're looking for. There is not many Sharons. There is not many Tamikas, because of this curvy path that has plagued the communities, and not everybody is where they are today. And it is a fact. And while the community continues to try to build within itself, it does need help from the white community. So like, change that word privilege to, your posture to be able to pull someone to that success. And I think that we will be a better community and a nation as a whole. Any other questions?
Well, no, I think actually what you said really ties well into the conversation about why do we have to pay for it now? I didn't do that stuff, but I pay for it now. And I think it's not about that. It's funny. It's kind of like this is a quote from a comic book, but I think it rings true in real life all day, every day, because we all are people who are powerful. And the quote is, with great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely.
And so I think about all the power that we have, and it's what are we going to do with it? Are we going to be selfish and just screw everyone else? It's just about me getting the best that I can do. Or are we going to take more responsibility and acknowledge, hey, I have these things and others do not, or I'm aware of these things and I have the ability to affect change to help things better. How does that, and some people I think kind of look at things as, well, I got mine. If I go against the grain, then I might lose mine. And that's not the case. Like, you're not going to lose, who you are and what you do and what you have just because you're willing to go to the fight and go to the table and say, hey, these things are not right. And we need to try to put things in place to try to correct it.
It's not pie. There aren't limited amount of pieces available.
Right. Exactly.
So in here we talked about we see examples of racism, systemic racism, and even looking at the Black man on this picture, some racial trauma. So we're gonna dig into some of those, into those definitions, and we'll get on what Christian just said. Or is it a selfish mechanism, or is there something that we can do to change that selfishness and pass it along? No, we're not being socialists, but no, we have a privilege. We have a intellectual capacity to be able to pass this on. And it's not just the burden of one specific color to take care of their own. It should be generational. It should be across gender. It can be across any, multidimensional on how we reach back and be able to pour into other individuals, because we're all human beings. So let's just all pour into the human race. So talked about racism, and I really like the definitions that came from the Cambridge Dictionary. It talks about the belief that some races are better than others and unfair treatment of someone because of his or her race. But the one that I really like the most, and we'll talk about this more in the next few slides, but the harmful or unfair things that people say, do, or think based on the belief that their own race makes them more intelligent, good, moral, etc., than people of other races. And then the racism, systemic racism, again in the Cambridge Dictionary, defines it as the policies and practices that exist throughout a whole society or organization, and that result in and support a continued unfair advantage of some people and unfair or harmful treatment as others based on race. So the ism that I highlighted here talks about the ism as a system, and that ism can be felt either at the personal level on how you were raised in your family, the interpersonal level as far as the experiences that you received growing up. It could be institutional, what you learn within an organization on how an institution or a job or occupation acts or treats the people of color. And then the cultural, what cultural norms did you grow up in? What was your neighborhood like? What was your group of friends like? Were they all homogenous and learned these isms either by absence or by influence from another outside source? So we talked, there's another area where we talked about denial. Let's talk about the deflecting, I'm sorry. deflecting the problem, like it's not my problem, it's the institution's fault. This is what the institution has done to us. This is what the institution has caused. And these institutions have caused a burden on the African American, on the Black and African American community. And we've seen that reflect in areas of healthcare, the access or lack thereof, the mental health of it all. We talked about housing. We know about redlining, where we see communities that are impoverished, and major highways actually going through those areas versus those nice suburban towns that have quiet and gated communities, cul-de-sacs. Education, the opportunity to be able, based on Sangeeta mentioned earlier, if you, based on the taxes, maybe that they can invest in some of the wealthier schools and be able to give more to certain school districts, where other school districts can't even take a book home to study from. They have to either have handouts or something else because they're in an overcrowded public school systems. Criminal justice, we know about that. We know about the many inequities with regards to people of color being arrested at higher rates than their white counterpart. Financing, wealth per capita, the media, which I spoke about, the grocery store run. There are, and we've seen former First Lady Michelle Obama, tried to do the right campaign to be able to impress upon people to eat healthier, because of the foods that lower income people have access to are just not healthy for what we're putting in. And then it starts that systemic problem, right? It goes into the healthcare system, it goes into their wellness, it feeds their mental, and it's just a perpetual chain that can keep a group down. And we know that there are, it's not just the Blacks who are poor or the Blacks who are disadvantaged in this, but per capita, the Blacks are severely disadvantaged in these areas. So a racist, a person who believes that some races are better than others, who acts unfairly to someone because of his or her race. In the Oxford Dictionary, says it's used as an adjective that the person is actually being prejudiced against or antagonistic towards a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. So how many people, show of hands, have come out or have heard people say, but I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist, because the implication that you are a racist actually goes against the moral fiber that you were told that you were actually being good for. So you don't want your moral to ever be questioned. And the racism is categorized as a moral deformity, of a moral derogatory term. So nobody wants to see them being racist. And I used to think, sometimes just replacing that C in racist with a P in rapist, nobody wants to be implied as a rapist either. You get that letter, you get that known entity on you that they have a mental and moral problem that they can actually violate someone physically. Well, racism with a C, we're talking about actually violating someone's rights just because someone thinks that they're better than the other person. So let's we need to take a stand on moving past that moral issue. And we have to understand, I am a believer that because of our personal or interpersonal, our cultural and institution, that we may have some biased views. It may not be considered racist, saying that mine is better than yours, but it may cause me to, make judgments that may be unfair. And then they talk about being an anti-racist as people being opposed to the unfair treatment of people who belong to other races. So, I've read Dr. Ibram Kendi's book as How to Be Anti-Racist, and there is a racist and anti-racist, and you can be racist and anti-racist even in the same sentence that you're saying. It's just being conscious of what you are saying, understanding where you are, and understanding who you're talking to on how you're pushing your beliefs. Does anybody have any comments? Does anybody want to share their comments on what they see or what they've have experienced as a race in a race-related event?
The only thing I would say is that there's definitely there's like fear around that word with a lot of people, and the language itself is from a deficit perspective, right? There's not even the word anti-racist, it's like the deficit of a deficit, right? Like there, right. And that's one of the questions that I have is like, do we have like, and I don't want to, you don't want to like conform to or placate, right? But like, is there in development more like asset driven language or something? Because it is tough. Like,
it is.
You know, through marriage, I have a blended family where like my family is Latino, my husband's family is white. And sometimes it's tough to talk like, are you either racist or anti-racist? Both are considered active. There is no passive place to be anymore, right? So like, then that's probably where you're getting to, right? But I think that's one of the struggles is like, both feel incredibly charged, and especially with older generations, it's tough to them to feel like a racist or an anti-racist. And so it's tough to engage without asset-driven language. So that's just my question is like, and that's probably that's exactly what this is about, right? But like, how do you, like back to, you know, I think it was Dr. Brown who was like the labels, right? Like there's labels being thrown in every direction. So I don't really know what my question is there, except for like, is there a way to turn it into an asset-driven conversation instead of such a deficit-loaded conversation to try to get people to feel like they're part of something, not, you know what I mean? Like they're part of the positive, not accidentally part of the negative, right? To inspire.
I think
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Timika.
No, I was just going to add on, you know, it is so funny how we in society tend to create labels, right? So quick to create these labels and that you must be one way or the other. And that, you know, if in the lack of being one, you must be the other. And it is very unfortunate. And that's something that we can't change overall, but I will acknowledge to you that I have my biases. And the only way that I can overcome my personal biases is by living and understanding that of other people, their thoughts, and having the conversation. That's what I do to diffuse, like, please educate me. I know that having 15 different cultural and affinity clubs here, I have learned so much about the other communities and what they have to go through and what they're saying. I had a wherewithal, but I've gained a deeper understanding and a greater respect for that. What about anybody else? What are your thoughts on acknowledging the word racist or anti-racist, or in place of something else to continue the conversation and not just letting it end there?
Timika, I don't want to interrupt, but we have about a little over 15 minutes left.
Oh my.
So we can continue on this slide, which I'm perfectly fine with. Or did you want to
no, I definitely
Amy
want to
Cooper?
Keep going. Yes,
did you want to jump to the Amy Cooper? But if someone has a comment they want to make, I don't want to cut anyone off.
Please. All right, let me talk about something that's very important that's going on in our world today, and that is racial trauma. And I want you to think back to the American Dream game, and I want you to think about the look on the Black man's path and his eyes and his posture and things like that. And there is a mental state within the Black community, this has been studied, on the realm of racial trauma. And basically things of fear, hypervigilance, headaches, insomnia, body aches, memory difficulties, self-blame, confusion, guilt after experiencing racism. But the thing is they don't have to experience the racism themselves. These experiences often are things that they are watching on TV, things that I don't want to say that everything is a monolith, that everybody's going to react and feel the same way, but it is a cumulative effect that does wear on people, and people take this in differently, that often results in chronic stress. So previous experiences with racism, as well as their awareness and understanding of the long history of racism, is directed, they feel like it's starting to be directed towards them. And then understanding, the roots of slavery and how the laws that have impacted us, like that path, is a cumulative effect of the racial trauma that exists in some African Americans today. And then we understand and learn a lot from our parents and our grandparents and others who have actually gone through the segregation laws or being denied it or having a family member who was lynched. Just continue to go back and back. My husband grew up in segregated North Carolina. So his experiences are very real. He lived it. So when he comes to the dinner table with talking about his experiences as a child in North Carolina, and I give my experience as a child from New Jersey, we definitely have opposing opinions. And what are we teaching our kids to be aware of? It's definitely, his racial trauma was definitely felt. So, as we leave this conversation, I want you to think about any examples of racial trauma that you may have experienced. We talk about what's the big deal, so some people, when they saw the things like the George Floyd incident, people couldn't understand why so many people were responsive or angry over the George Floyd incident. I even personally got asked, was I related to him? Why was I upset? And it's not a matter of us being upset like he was my personal friend. I don't know him, but it is the fatigue that comes when you see time after time of these things happening to people that you just can't understand. Why does this need to go on without anybody checking this or making it right? One of the things that we continue to go for is the Crown Act, where African-American women or men who choose to wear their hair in their natural braid have been discriminated against just because of the look of their hair. And here's the statistics from if you look up the Crown Act, you'll find these statistics there. And it says Black women are 1.5 times more likely to be sent home from the workplace just because of how their hair looks. And that Black women are 80% more likely than white women to agree with the following statement: I have to change my hair from its natural state just to fit into the office. Look at the young man from South Jersey, and I did not pick him because he's from New Jersey, but because it made national headlines. In 2018, a wrestler from Buna from South Jersey was made to cut his locks if he wanted to continue to wrestle. And say that and it was not out of the regulations at the time, but he had to literally sit there if he wanted to wrestle and not take the forfeit and actually cut his hair right there on the side of the mat. So we talked about George Floyd. We're not going to go into a deep discussion here, but how many of you know about Amy Cooper? I don't know how many of you have heard of this or not, but I'm going to ask Mariah to go ahead and play the clip. We'll just stay with the one clip, Mariah. We'll just play the first one if that's okay in the interest of time.
Okay.
And then I'll talk through the second one.
I wasn't able to cue it through the ad.
Oh.
So we have to watch the ad real quick.
Okay.
Hold on, let me get it. Is that the Central Park woman or the bird watcher? They're both white women who called 911.
I think it's that one.
Oh, this one says Amy Cooper. Okay.
So just to put it into context while we're waiting for Mariah to get that, Amy Cooper is the woman in New York whose dog was off his leash, his or her leash, and Christopher Cooper, who was a bird watcher, asked her to put the dog on the leash, and she called the police 2 times, one time to report him and the second time to actually say that he was assaulting her. So that's just to bring everyone up.
Okay. Let me know if you can hear it. You hear it?
No sound.
The rules. She refused.
You hear it
Please
now?
don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking.
Yes.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
This video was see why. In a part of Central Park known as the Ramble, this woman called New York Police on a man who asked her to obey the posted signs and keep her dog on a leash.
Ma'am, dogs in the ramble have to be leashed at all times. And she was actually standing right next to the sign that says dogs in the ramble have to be leashed at all times.
The ramble is a wildlife habitat popular with bird watchers like Chris Cooper. Dogs disturb the birds, which is why he was asking her to follow the rules. She refused.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
My thinking was I can sort of capitulate to this racial intimidation, or I can just do what I'm doing and continue recording.
He kept recording and captured this.
There is an African-American man. I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the ramble. Please send the cops immediately.
Her false report to 911 didn't get the response she was hoping for. Chris Cooper's sister uploaded the video. Someone identified the woman as Amy Cooper, a vice president at Franklin Templeton. The company issued this statement tonight on Twitter, saying they do not condone racism of any kind, and their employee has been put on administrative leave.
She has since apologized. Now, what about the dog, the Cocker Spaniel you see in the video struggling while she inexplicably pulls him onto his hind legs by the collar? Well, his name is Henry. He was a rescue dog, and the rescue organization saw the video too, and tonight it is reporting that she has surrendered the dog back to them. Hello, I'm Mark Brown. Click the ABC 7.
Lost her job and the dog.
I think she got the dog back, actually.
Did she?
Yeah, she got the dog back, and the charges were dropped. Christopher Cooper did not want to press any charges, so she did go through a relationship building workshop. She had to complete that, and I think it was just a month ago that all the charges were dismissed. And but I do think they feel as though that she paid enough, and I believe that her job, she was fired from her job. First, she was put on administrative leave, and she was fired from her job. So Christopher Cooper was like, "That's enough," and he called this incident actually a distraction, and saying that how can we go after some of the big things and address the bigger issue here of systemic racism here. So let's talk about. Just real quick, can I get some words, on what type of things were being used here? Let me go to my slides again. Considering all that we've covered today, how do you think everything played out in this situation? What did Amy Cooper weaponized to put Christopher Cooper in his place? We kind of talked about some of those words today.
I think she weaponized her whiteness in her favor and his blackness against him.
Also her gender.
Yeah.
She weaponized her gender as well. Does everyone know what we mean by weaponizing these concepts? Is there anyone who wants to? Okay.
So consider her voice. Did you hear her plea? I'm in a park and I'm being assaulted by a black man. When clearly she wasn't being assaulted by him, and look what the dog was yelping too, like he was in pain. So the sound to a recorder, a person on the other end, made it sound like she was being, she's out of breath. She's crying in desperation, and she knew what the cops would probably do to this black man that may be assaulting a white woman in a park. She knew what would happen. Any other comments?
I was just going to say, I think it was her voice, "I'm being assaulted, please come," like all of those kind of privileges that she brought in, the urgency that she presented when he was clearly 15 yards from her. Mm-hmm. That was so dangerous.
Mm-hmm. It was.
That was just so dangerous. And I actually, I'm of the belief that she got off easy, frankly, because we've seen so much happen. She lost her job. People have lost their life. I would have been A-okay with her going to jail. You know what I mean? Like, I think she got up way too easy, frankly, and I understand that he said it was a distraction, but like, that is so dangerous. And she knew what she was doing. She was manipulating the situation intentionally to scare him and to get her way. Like, she was manipulating the entire situation. And it's just like
Well,
her.
she started with the video too, like, put your video away. Like, she spoke to him as though he had to follow her directions, which, like, even before she called the cops, it was a lot.
Yeah. So this is very unfortunate, but not uncommon. And I just want to highlight, this event happened the same day that George Floyd was murdered. So for me, waking up on Tuesday, the 26th of May, and seeing these two videos back to back,
oh gosh,
just it threw me into my racial trauma. And I'm like, what do I need to do? What have I not done to move us past this needle? I felt like I personally took on myself that I had fallen back and had fallen off my responsibilities in working towards equity in all of this. And I don't know Amy Cooper, Christopher Cooper, or George Floyd in this matter, but it just felt like we were falling back in time as to how these things were being used against the Black community. This really brings back to me the story of Emmett Till. And for those of you who don't know about Emmett Till was with his mother. His mother sent him down south to be with family over the summer in 1955. And this was down in Mississippi. And he went into a local grocery store, a little corner store. And the one rumor was that when he whistled to a white woman by the name of Caroline Bryant, but he was bragging that because he was from Chicago, and he was bragging to his cousins that he had a white girlfriend in Chicago, that it wasn't the same. But regardless, the woman who was behind the counter, Caroline Bryant, said that she was assaulted. She was actually, let me make sure that I have it right. He went in, brought some candy on the way home, said, "Bye, baby." There were no witnesses but Carolyn Bryant and the woman behind the counter who claimed that he grabbed her and made lewd advances and wolf whistled as she sauntered out. She went home and told her husband, who grabbed his brother-in-law, her brother, and they went to the house and grabbed him, took him out. He was 14 years old. They made Emmett carry a 75-pound cotton gin fan to the bank of the Tallahatchie River, ordered him to take off his clothes, and the two men beat him nearly to death, gouged out his eye, shot him in the head, and then threw his body tied to the cotton gin fan with barbed wire into the river. They didn't find him until 3 days later. The atrocity and the picture of his mom just crying in disbelief. She actually made a national decision to leave his casket open so that someone can see the atrocity that happens to a 15-year-old boy. And then what's even more tragic in all of this is that Caroline Bryant, in her later years, in her 80s, says that she doesn't actually recall that that's what happened. She doesn't even recall actually if the event was really true, implying that she made it up. And that decision that she made back in 1955 to make this allegation has ruined a mother, her family, the community, the community of Mississippi, of Money, Mississippi. It has had racial impacts to many people on the atrocities of what can be done. And no one served a single day in jail for what happened to this young boy. So weaponization has existed back then, and it's still existing today. And we have to get people to understand their biases, and they have to know what they're using and what the repercussions can be, not just to the individual, but to a community, to a nation, on what these things hold. So here's what's worked for me. I seek to always educate myself on the disparities that exist today. I am Winston Churchill said, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I'm also of the saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. We have to stop doing the same thing over and over again. We have to be bold and we have to do something different. And we are asking that as a Black woman, we are asking the white community to do more, to say enough is enough, to help us, because the burden isn't just on the people of color to advance us along. The empathy. My experiences are mine and mine only. So I have to put myself in other shoes to better understand their attitudes and views. Engagement. I always seek to be an active listener. I want to create deeper and more meaningful conversations because I feel as though that it builds more trust and it brings us to a place of healing. Until that conversation happens, that engagement happens, until that defensiveness and that denial, that invisibility factor that we talked about earlier today, we will never get to a place of understanding and movement in the same direction. And then empowerment. We're all human beings. So therefore, we weren't actually born this way. We were born into, the circumstances that we have. It should not be our fault of the circumstances that we're in, either because we're Black or because they're white. It's not our fault, but we know that our values are what is built, and we can change these values to actually be in a more inclusive and respectful environment. The hardest step is always the first step, but it always comes from holding others with dignity and respect. So hopefully we've learned something today on how you can be a better person and affect those that are around you. And I'll leave this quote from Mahatma Gandhi on what your words and your actions do. And prayerfully that what you've learned today helps you shape your values and your actions and habits and create a new destiny path for yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Timika. Absolutely agree with you. And that's one of the reasons why Mariah and I created this series, is that it's our goal this year to put out as much information as we can to try and move these conversations along in a very respectful, fruitful manner, so that by the end of this year, we actually have moved this needle a little bit. That's really our desire and our hope for this year. We do need to end. We need to be cognizant of everyone's time, but if anyone has any last thoughts or anything, if you need to leave, please feel free to log out. But if you want to stay and have any last comments, we will definitely stay here and listen. So we're getting some comments in the DM. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your attendance and your participation. Our next talk will be on Wednesday, April the 21st. Please join us for that chat. And we look forward to seeing you at other events. Please do let other people know as well, because we want to try and grow these conversations as much as we can. So thank you very much for participating, and thank you to Captain Timika Lindsay for taking her time to come and chat with us today.